Welcome to a very special edition of 2.5 Hours. I'm Brian Becker. We're outdoors. We're in downtown Washington, D.C. We're in Freedom Plaza, just a block and a half from the White House where President Obama is, and 13 blocks from the U.S. Capitol building. We're here also with hundreds, and it has been thousands of people who have been occupying downtown D.C. and are part of a growing protest movement that's sweeping the country. We're joined here in Washington, D.C. by two special guests, Colonel Ann Wright, a colonel with the U.S. military, a member of the State Department, one of the very few officials who resigned on March 19, 2003 in protest over the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Welcome.
Thank you.
And by Iraq War veteran Mike Preisner. Mike was in Iraq during the invasion in 2003. He's also part of the organization March Forward that's organizing Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans and also part of this global protest movement. Ann Wright, let's start with you. We see lots of people here. They've been here for days. What's going on? What's the purpose of this?
Well, the purpose is for citizen activists to be here for whatever issue it is, to tell their government their concerns about it. And the protests are for everything from corporate greed, corporate corruption, accountability, environmental issues, our monetary system, to stopping the wars, trying to get the military-industrial complex from spending all of our money at the expense of our domestic programs.
Well, there are many issues, but it's also, it began October 6th, and that's the time to coincide, I guess, with the 10th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan. Is that a big issue here?
Well, absolutely. The 6th of October is something that was commemorated right here, and this particular Freedom Plaza and October 2011 was started specifically so that we could acknowledge that it's been 10 years that the United States has been killing Afghans, has been expanding wars into Pakistan and Yemen and Somalia, all in the name of this terrorism. But it's the anniversary of the involvement of the United States, the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, that kicked this off.
Mike Preisner, you were in the Iraq invasion in 2003. We saw in January the people of Egypt rose up after the people of Tunisia had toppled the Ben Ali dictatorship. That movement spread throughout the Middle East. It was called the Arab Spring. There are mass protests in Europe against austerity. Is this part of what might be called the American Spring?
I would say absolutely, and I think the reason that the demonstrations in Egypt and the uprising there and throughout the Arab world, that the reason it resonated so much with people here in the United States, which we saw in Wisconsin, where workers there held up signs in Arabic and saying from Madison to Cairo, workers are rising up. That's because really, it's the same enemies that we're facing. The people in Egypt, the people throughout the Middle East who have been rising up against these dictatorships that are set up, in the interests of that 1%, the wealthy, and Wall Street here in the United States, and people's growing discontent here at home is directed against that same exact enemy.
Well, in Wall Street, in New York City, about 830 people have been arrested in the last 3.5 weeks. There was a very large protest that was suppressed and basically smashed by the police when 700 people were arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge. Do you see the efforts like in the Middle East where government power, government repression, police repression are being used against the demonstrators, and is it likely to have an impact?
It is, and I think we've already seen that impact. We know that when the police have tried to come down on the demonstrations in Wall Street and in other cities where they have, just like they did in Cairo, just like they did in other countries, it did nothing to deter the people, but in fact enlivened them and emboldened them and brought more people into the streets because they were really witnessing, the fight back that was coming from the rich, with these essentially these hired thugs that were being used, not because these protesters were breaking any laws, were fully within their democratic rights, but in an attempt to try to beat back this growing movement that was really threatening the powerful people in this country.
Ann Wright, you were in the U.S. military for 30 years. You were a colonel. You were in the State Department. You were a diplomat. You were in Afghanistan shortly after or at the time of the September 11th attacks. The U.S. government uses the bully pulpit, so to speak, its position in diplomatic to lecture the rest of the world about democracy. But what about the police repression here?
Well, indeed, I was in Afghanistan, but I didn't go in there until December of 2001.
Okay.
As the U.S. was reopening its U.S. embassy that had been closed for 12 years. And what we see in the 10 years after that has certainly been police repression here in the United States. We've seen, who would have thought that now it's a law that our own government can eavesdrop on American citizens? The oppression of eavesdropping, surveillance. We've seen minority groups that have been targeted. We now see assassinations that are authorized by our government. There's an assassination committee right over here, 1 block away in the National Security Council.
Help people who are international viewers explain that, because the whole idea of democracy is that the individual has due process. The government doesn't have arbitrary authority to either arrest people and certainly not to kill them. The Obama administration, people thought that was going to be something far different from Bush, but it seems to be worsening.
Indeed, it is worsening. We are seeing things that I don't think anyone ever thought possible, particularly when you have elected a president that is he termed himself a constitutional law professor, for God's sakes. He was a lawyer. He knows the laws. He knows the Constitution, and yet we have extrajudicial killings now authorized by the Obama administration, and we have a secret committee that's making the target list of who the United States is going to assassinate. No court, no courts, no evidence. Individuals deciding who's going to be killed.
Let me ask you. So there's a committee in the U.S. government that decides who will die.
That's right.
And they're then targeted for assassination by either CIA or Joint Special Operations or whatever. Who's on the committee?
We don't know. That's what's so chilling about this whole thing. First, that there is a committee. That's the number one thing. There should not be a committee. I mean, we should not be assassinating people. It's against our law, for God's sakes. And now we have a committee that we don't even know about. I mean, it just exposed just this last week that there is this committee that has made up its targets list. It's already targeted one American citizen who has now been assassinated in Yemen without a trial, within no attempt to provide evidence to the public of what he's been doing. I mean, bringing him on trial. That's the way we do things. Used to we did that way, but now we kill them and ask questions later.
Mike Breisner, you're in your 20s. You were part of that generation that went to war in March 19, 2003. I saw quite a number of Iraq veterans and Afghanistan war veterans here. Is the message of this protest movement, the Occupy Wall Street movement or the Occupy Washington movement, is that also having some impact on the rank and file of the U.S. military? Same age group, after all.
Absolutely. First of all, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who have gotten out of the military are coming home to really difficult conditions where for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, unemployment is 30%. I mean, that's more than double the official national average. They have a college dropout rate of nearly 70% because of the difficulty of transitioning into civilian life. Over 11,000 Iraq and Afghanistan veterans are homeless, are sleeping on the streets. Disproportionate rate of evictions and foreclosures. And for soldiers inside the military today, which is really the most significant side of this, this demonstration, these demonstrations that are happening are resonating with soldiers inside the military because they have now been on their 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th and 8th and sometimes 9th deployment to 2 wars that I can tell you the majority of people in the military today cannot explain why they have to continue to go to them. And I'd say the majority do not want to continue to go. And these are wars that are unpopular wars that the majority of Americans oppose.
You know, the demonstration here on Saturday, I believe, went to the Air and Space Museum. I mean, people might wonder, well, why did you go to a museum to have a demonstration? Aren't there just tourists going there? What was the purpose of that demonstration?
Well, the purpose of it was to go to a military exhibit in that museum, a military exhibit, drones, these assassination vehicles, the unmanned aerial vehicles that are the assassin vehicles for this administration. And here in our National Museum, Air and Space Museum, they are glorifying these implements. And earlier in the day, we'd already been up to General Atomics, which is one of the makers of the drones, and had an hour demonstration out in front of the corporate headquarters of one of the manufacturers to tell those people that were looking at us down from the heights of that building to tell them that they are killers. They're making these killing devices that are being used by our government in extrajudicial killing.
I mean, it's kind of an amazing statement about American society that you have people sitting in Virginia, right across the Potomac, watching real live video, streaming from drones, and then deciding whether or not to pull the trigger and kill people thousands of miles away. And then American and international tourists coming to sort of celebrate this new technology at the museum. What happened, Mike Preisner, when you got to the museum? You wanted to bring signs inside?
Well, what happened was, I mean, there was a march of about 3,000 people that took the streets of D.C., led a very spirited march to the steps of the museum. And the head of that demonstration, the demonstrators, of course, wanted to go into the museum and really stand at the exhibit and explain to people why they were there and show opposition to that exhibit being there. I mean, which is essentially very, it's a disgusting thing. These drones killing people every single day. But as soon as the demonstrators approached the doors of that museum, the doors were opened by the security guards who sprayed everyone in the front line with protesters, threw people on the ground, arrested them, brutalized many people, and then locked up the museum and shut it down. This is a public museum with supposedly free admission to all citizens who would like to see it.
So your point in going there was to tell people who were going what the effect of drone technology is.
Absolutely, and there's this other side to it. I mean, if you walk around Washington, D.C., you don't just have to go to the Air and Space Museum, but everywhere you see these advertisements by defense contractors for these armored vehicles and drone aircraft and tanks and things like that. Of course, not things that people walking around D.C. are normally going to buy, except for those generals and politicians that have this blank check of our tax dollars to purchase in the multi-billions of dollars these defense contracts, while so much money is needed here at home and so much money is being squandered on these wars. Iraq and Afghanistan alone, over $800 million a day, while here in the United States, there's almost 40 million people who do not have a job, who are underemployed, who are living on the streets, living in their cars. And I think, that exhibit at the museum, and really all of these other examples you can see here in D.C., puts on, real display that there's this vast squandering of resources, and it's coming from our pockets of average working people.
And right, I want to ask you, in terms of the consciousness of the people who are here in this square, here in Freedom Plaza, and the people who are in Occupy Wall Street, and these hundreds of other encampments that are springing up, it's multi-generational, and you have people who are older, who are largely maybe peace activists or perhaps labor activists, and then a whole new generation of people who haven't really been touched in the past by the political movement. Are you, as a peace campaigner, as a peace activist, are you trying to bring the message of the connection between militarism, say, and unemployment? And if so, is that resonating with young people?
Well, we certainly are, and we're thrilled to see that a lot of these Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Boston, Occupy D.C., these movements are composed of younger people. It is remarkable to see all these folks out here, and for us who have been working on the issue of trying to get these wars ended because of the huge loss of life, the immorality of the wars, and then the expense of the wars that are just draining our country dry. To work with these new people on the streets to remind them that their future is really tied to how much of our money goes into the wars. And the message is certainly resonating. They know about it. They know that that their family homes are being foreclosed. They know that their educational opportunities are fewer and fewer. There are fewer scholarships that are available. They know that their roads are being beaten up and never repaired. They know this, and that connection now to say for sure, look at where the money is going. 60% of our budget, when you add in all aspects of national security, is 60% of our budget goes there instead of
60% goes to military.
To military, yeah, defense-related operations and equipment. And let me just mention that right here in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Army has a huge exhibition going on. 38,000 contractors are in town right now up at the convention center, and we've already sent a delegation up to tell them we want them to get out of town, that we don't like what they're bringing into this city, all of their implements of war.
Well, there's a kind of a general feeling that those thousands of contractors and the lobbyists who represent military corporations are in some ways a shadow government. And Mike, I want to ask you, I mean, in other words, we have 435 members right down the street in the U.S. Congress, and then there's thousands and perhaps tens of thousands of contractors and lobbyists who are holding parties and whining and dining those people and paying the bills for their campaigns. I'm wondering, Mike, if you would talk about the fact that it seems like there's almost two Americas. I mean, there's the elite, there's the upper crust, there's the political class, and then there's these people out in the squares all over the country.
Right. Well, we're told our whole lives that we're this one nation and that we're all in this together. And there's when it comes to the wars, especially, the politicians, the generals, they over and over again say this is in our national interest and this is for our security. And they speak as though that we're all this one group of people that has an interest in what's happening overseas and the decisions that are made in U.S. foreign policy. But when you really look at who is gaining from the wars, it's not 90% of the population here in the United States. In fact, we suffer more because of them. It's our family members who go and die. It's our friends who come home in wheelchairs. It's our tax dollars, as you said, and 60% of them going to the wars. We're paying from it with our social programs, with our education. But there are a very small group of people here in the United States that are doing very well because of the wars. It's those oil giants, it's the Wall Street banks, it's the CEOs of the defense contractors, and it's those politicians, very much the majority of whom are millionaires, and those generals in the Pentagon who, as soon as they retire, go straight into working for the defense contractors themselves. And so it's very obvious that there isn't, this one society in the United States. There are two societies in the United States, and one society is attacking the other every single day.
That's the slogan on Wall Street is, we are the 99%, you are the 1%, the idea of two Americas. I want to explore that a little bit more with you, Ann Wright, because you were in the military and a State Department person. How many people like you, as an act of conscience, resigned or protested openly when the Iraq invasion took place?
Well, there were only 3 of us that actually resigned, but each one of us received emails from colleagues in the State Department and actually from the Department of Defense saying, we know what you've done the right thing. We wish we could have resigned, but we've got kids in college, we've got mortgages, we've got all of these things that we can't give up our jobs, but we don't agree at all with the policies of the administration, and we will try to slow down, this war. They were unable to do it, for sure. We have members of the U.S. government that are out here with us right now, that are here. They are working in the government. We've had active duty military that have been here camping out with us. We've got civilians in our government that are out here with us that are saying, we're still working for the government, but we don't like those policies.
Well, that's an interesting concept. The U.S. media presented the Occupy movement as a bunch of hippies when it got started, like middle class, mainly white, disgruntled, alienated young people. What you're saying is that this isn't a narrow group, that this is a broad group, and there are even people from the government or from the military who are here, but sort of undercover in a way. Is it a broad movement, Mike Preisner? Is it a broad movement in the sense that you feel that other sectors of the population who normally would never be in a protest are coming out now?
Sure. I just came here from Los Angeles, where there was over 1,000 people who were a part of the occupation in Los Angeles. Been here in D.C. for almost a week now and seen, really people from all walks of life coming into the streets and taking political action. Many people who never have before in their entire lives. And I think there's a real reason for that. And I think that, there's always this line that people say is that, so many people are apathetic, no change can really happen in the United States. No one really cares, they're too comfortable. But the more we're seeing conditions get worse economically in the United States, the more the wars, which are very unpopular, continue, people are being forced into motion. People are being pushed into political action because it's their lives that are on the line. And so people are having to fight because it's fight or starve for many people.
It's kind of interesting. We hear a lot of noise around in the area, and people are going to form what's called a General Assembly in a few minutes because there's issues of what's going to happen with the police here. Are the police going to clear this park? We're creating almost what seems like a kind of a direct democracy in all of these parks and assemblies around the country. Is it something new?
Well, in the scale, I think it really is the true participatory democracy where everybody has a say in what's going on, and that there really are no chosen few that are the leadership, that they rotate being facilitators and having meetings where everybody gets to participate. It's really a remarkable experience here. It takes a little more time than dictatorships do because people are listened to, that people are asked their views, and time is given for discussion of them and consensus in them, which is something we rarely see in America.
You know, we're going to take a short break in a few minutes, and we'll have a second half. But Mike, I want to ask you the same question. Participatory democracy, I mean, the United States heralds itself as the great democracy in the world, but there are people here who are saying we don't need the political leaders to represent us.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, this idea of democracy in the United States has really been proven to be a sham. You know, the majority of people are against the war in Iraq, 2/3 of the American public against the war in Afghanistan, the majority against the bank bailouts, the majority favoring a single-payer universal healthcare system, and the majority favoring forgiveness of student loan debt and things like that. But of course, that doesn't happen, and so I think what people are realizing more and more, and it was especially approved with the election of President Obama, which people really believed were representing all of these things that I mentioned, and then the popular will of the people, was shown to be, you know, not something that can affect change. And I so think the idea of direct democracy here and people's action in the streets all over the nation is showing that people are understanding that change comes from below and change comes from a struggle.
Back to you, Ann Wright. I want to ask pretty much the same question, but taking off on what Mike said about President Obama. Do you think most of the people here supported President Obama in 2008? And if so, how do they feel now?
I think a lot of people did support President Obama that are here today because they wanted change from what 8 years of the Bush administrations had been. I think they are very disenchanted. They feel like they have been lied to, that the promises that were made by Obama during his campaign have not been met at all. And in fact, they're just more of the same, more of the continuation of the Bush wars, more of the continuation of the Bush Guantanamos, more of the continuation of bailing out Wall Street, more of lack of transparency, more of no accountability, no holding criminals, either in the civilian sector or the governmental sector, accountable for anything. So I think people are very disappointed.
Well, let's try to help people understand why. President Obama was undoubtedly very popular. Bush was very unpopular. The Democrats had the great majority in the House of Representatives. They had 59 senators in the U.S. Senate. In other words, just one short of a veto-proof majority. And in fact, they had an independent senator who was mainly voting with them. You can't ask for better electoral arrangement. So why has it gotten worse? I mean, is it President Obama? Is it President Obama, the personality? Are there institutions at work? Does it matter who's president? What's your opinion?
Well, I think it does matter who's president. In fact, I was just over at the FDR memorial here on the Mall and reading the statements that are on that wall of a president that was bringing a country out of wars, bringing it out of depressions, trying to address the needs of people that were unemployed, millions, tens of millions of people unemployed in our country, and creating the types of programs that would put people back on the streets, put people back in jobs, put money into pockets so that good pockets so that food could be purchased for families, that kids could go to school, all sorts of programs that were created for the people. And then to see that we're really in the same position right now. We're trying to get out of wars, or the people want these wars ended, and we want our money spent in different ways to help the people. And yet we see a president that was perfectly capable in his first 2 years in office. As you mentioned, he had the numbers in Congress to be able to do that, and yet he didn't have the political will to go ahead and do it. We knew it was going to be hard, but that's why people had worked so hard for him and told him what we wanted done for our country, and he didn't do it.
Mike, in 30 seconds, and then we're going to take a short break. Do you agree with Ann Wright? Is it a lack of will on President Obama? Is it a personality issue? Is it their institutions? What's going on? In 20 seconds, we'll come back and ask you more.
Well, I think regardless of who's in president, the lessons of history show us that any time a president has ever made any change that's in the interest of the majority of people, in the interest of working families, anything that's been progressive, that's been a real significant change in the United States, it's never been from their own personal decisions or on a whim. It's always been in response to a fight-back movement of the masses of people from all walks of life in the United States. And I think that that's how change is going to be effective.
I want to come back and we'll talk about the strategy of this in this new movement after we take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the second segment of 2.5 Hours. We're right here in Freedom Plaza, just a block and a half from the White House, 13 blocks from the U.S. Congress, and right here where people have gathered since October 6th to say stop the machine. We're here with Kevin Zeese, one of the primary organizers, and Todd Rowell, political cartoonist and columnist. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin Zeese, there's been a little bit of drama here this afternoon. People were prepared for what? And what happened just now with the park police and with the government authorities?
Well, we were prepared for the police to come in and remove us because our permit was running out, although we've been in violation of the permit since we've had it. The first night here, we slept in the park. That's against park rules. Then the tents came up, people sleeping in tents. That's against park rules. Some of our food was beyond what was allowed by the park. So we've been in violation constantly, so they could have taken us out at any time. They haven't, and they came by today to ask to meet with us. We asked for a public meeting with the whole full assembly. They refused that, and then we went on and had a private meeting with them. And we went over to the Park Service headquarters to do that, and the General Assembly is now considering their offer, which was to extend the permit for up to 4 months.
So let me just follow up with you. So you're not following all of the rules? And yet, while they could have used that as a pretext to evict this encampment, and they certainly have the police power to do it, they didn't do it. So there's a political calculation. What, in your opinion, is the calculation?
I think that we are really hitting a chord with a lot of people. I mean, the media has gone through a great deal of challenges with people being cut, with loss of income, loss of various benefits, and they're under a lot of financial stress as well. They feel like they are not being treated fairly as the economy either. So the media is also part of the 99%. They're not part of the 1%. And so the fact that we're putting out a message that's clear about economic injustice, the unfairness of the system, the wealth divide where 400 Americans have as much wealth as the bottom 154 million, it's resonating with them, and I think we're starting a conversation in the media, which we didn't expect, by the way. We thought the commercial media, the corporate media would be against us. We in fact focused very heavily on the independent media and really pushed for democratizing media by having everybody here be the media, because we were not counting on the corporate media. But surprisingly, we've gotten some great corporate media coverage. A debate is being started. What do they stand for? And what we stand for is ending corporate rule and shifting power to the people. And so that's a radical change, and started a discussion. We're getting good press. If they had come in and taken us out, they probably feared this would multiply.
Well, Ted, Raul, let me ask you the same question. There's unevenness in terms of government response. So far, as Kevin mentioned, there's sort of not a lot of police resistance to this encampment. In fact, they're bending the rules in order to allow it to continue. In New York City, 700 people were arrested when they were peacefully marching across the Brooklyn Bridge. Almost 900 have been arrested in Iowa. Last night, 30 or 40 were arrested. There were people arrested in Sacramento, California. What accounts for the different responses from different police forces? Is there a government-coordinated response, or is this city by city? And talk about New York, if you would, because that's the epicenter.
Yeah, and I am a New Yorker. I think that we're looking at different cultures that are largely uncoordinated, although no doubt different metropolitan police departments do talk to each other at the high levels. At the basis of it is that these people are responding to a system, to these demonstrations in an ad hoc manner. So here in Washington, they're used to these kinds of things all the time. Protests and demonstrations in public squares are nothing new.
Well, what's up with New York? Tell us about New York City.
But New York City has gotten particularly anti-demonstration over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And they've really, since the Giuliani years in particular, have started cracking down very harshly. They have kind of almost a zero-tolerance policy. They try to break these things up. It's almost like they're looking for trouble and in an effort to try to discourage future demonstrations and marches. They want everything to be coordinated very carefully with them. You have to apply for a parade permit if you want to do a march. It's a little bit looser in a lot of other cities, so I think it depends on the city, it depends on the police chief, it depends on their management.
I think also, Brian, that you got to make a difference. It's not Liberty Park that's where the arrests are occurring. The occupation in New York is continuing. So it's the off-park activities where the arrests are occurring. We had an off-plaza activity here at the Air and Space Museum at the drone exhibit. People were pepper sprayed. And so I think there's a difference between the encampment arrests versus the civil resistance protest arrests.
Well, I'll ask both of you the same question. There was an article on the front page of Counterpunch website today that highlighted the fact that many thousands of New York City police officers are also being paid $33 an hour by Merrill Lynch, by formerly Lehman Brothers, by the Wall Street banks and corporations. They come off duty, and they're being paid thousands of dollars per year to safeguard this private elite. Is that part of the problem in New York? Maybe New Yorkers don't know about this.
It's very analogous to a very corrupt city like New Orleans, where poorly paid police then work off duty for more money for private bar and tavern owners in order to provide security as bouncers. And it's kind of basically the NYPD is moonlighting as bouncers for Goldman Sachs, and that's what's going on.
But they have an incentive then to wail at those demonstrators. I saw they were just hitting them with batons all over the place when they even started to approach Wall Street on Saturday night or Wednesday night after a massive demonstration. Let me ask you about the unions. There's a lot of stir because the labor movement, which has been in decline in the United States, has now said definitively, both the AFL-CIO and Change to Win, that they're coming into the Occupy movement. Do you see that here, or do you expect it to come?
We've had some talk with local union officials, and I think you'll start seeing that next week. And it's a two-edged sword for us because we are very clear and we stand for an independent political movement. That means not allied with either political party. And so we don't want, in Spain, for example, when they did their real democracy movement, they will not allow unions to participate. They will not allow either political party to participate because they see them as corrupted. The unions are part of the Socialist Party. We could obviously say here the unions are part of the Democratic Party. And I think that there's been some rank and file anger about that. They want to see more independence in the unions. I think that's bubbling up from the bottom of the union movement. I think you're hearing a little rhetoric from that at the top as well. But so far, they're still very allied with the Democratic Party. I think the thing that would kill this Occupy movement quicker than anything else would be if we became allied with the Democratic Party. That would be the end of this movement.
Is it inevitable, Ted, if the unions come in and if lots of workers come in, that automatically means it'll go to the Democratic Party?
No, by no means at all. I mean, it's all about how these things are done. Look, if the unions want to come here and support us and help us, of course, obviously, no one's going to turn them away. We share most of their concerns. They probably share many of our concerns. But if they want, for instance, a quid pro quo, and they want us to support Democratic Party politics or pending legislation like the Obama jobs plan, then that's not something that we could get behind without being co-opted.
When Americans are in school, from the day we go to school, we sort of worship a revolution that took place in 1776. An armed struggle, in fact, a violent revolution against colonial power. And since that time, revolution has been verboten, not to be talked about by Americans. But now you get a sense of revolution in the air. Is it possible that there could be a kind of radical, systematic, or even revolutionary transformation?
I don't think that it is possible that there will not be. The only question is when and how long it will take. This system is headed toward collapse. It is overextended militarily. It's overextended financially. and it's morally bankrupt in the same way that the Soviet Union was in 1991. Collapse is inevitable. So the only question really is what's going to come next and when's it going to happen. And I would like to think that the powers of progressivism and leftism would step into the breach, rather than what I fear, which is the extreme right, which is probably at this point better positioned to do so.
Kevin, a lot has been discussed about the fact that this movement doesn't have leaders, that it doesn't have a political program, that it doesn't have specific demands, that it has tapping into a generalized discontent. But if the current system were to fall, there'd have to be something to take its place. You don't have a unilateral power over the movement, but from your point of view as a longtime activist, what kind of economic and political system are you fighting for?
I think what we're in the middle of is a battle between participatory democracy and concentrated wealth. And I think that's not just applying to government, but it applies to the economy, it applies to the media. What I want to see happen on all these fronts is more participatory democracy. So when you talk about the economy, we're talking about things like employee-owned businesses, employee-owned co-ops, community banks rather than Wall Street banks, where money stays in the community and the community has some say over where that money goes. A total remaking of the Federal Reserve so that they're not creating money, but the public is creating money for its own purposes, not for the purposes of bankers. A healthcare system where you have complete access. So I think the democratizing of the economy is almost more important than the democratizing.
But how does it happen? If you look at what happened starting in 2008 when Lehman Brothers fell, the government circled some of the big banks. They said, you're too big to fail. They contributed to a growing sort of concentration of capital. Small businesses got wiped out. They can't get credit now from the banks. The banks and even the non-banking business institutions are sitting on a mountain of cash and not lending it, not investing. How do you get there? How does one get to that kind of a system?
Well, you know, I was talking with Chris Hedges, the noted author and war correspondent. He's covered a lot of revolutions. And he says that every revolution he's covered, he's seen the same thing over and over again. People saying, well, maybe a year from now, maybe 5 years from now, we can get this. And then a week later or 3 weeks later, it collapses and everything changes. I think we are much more hollowed out in the United States than we acknowledge. I think the people in power are much more afraid and much weaker than we realize. I think that the pillars that hold this society up, the military is stretched thin because of absurd empire foreign policy. The police are having their pensions cut, their health care held back, their incomes held back. They're not happy campers. School systems, same thing. Those civil servants are not happy. Labor is not happy with the way unions are being treated. Youth are very unhappy with they are the lost generation as far as economics goes. They have the highest debt leaving school and the worst job prospects. The media is falling apart, and we're seeing an alternative media and a democratized media coming up to take its place. So that when you look at the pillars that hold this government in place, they're pretty shaky. We may be closer to the revolution than and the real transformation than we know.
Certainly the movement in Tunisia and Egypt happened very dynamically within, as you said, within days, weeks. Yep. What was considered to be unexpected fully happened and then became sort of inevitable as we look back upon it.
Right.
Ted, is it possible that there could be the kind of rising up of the American people that would sort of so shift the political calculation that there would be a political realignment? I mean, because the two parties right now seem to be very much the same. Same money, same corporate backing. And will the movement find an electoral outlet? I mean, it's the 2012 election is coming. That would be the natural tendency. Or will this somehow intervene and change what is the normal practice in American politics?
I think that if we were at a serious crisis within the paradigm of a normal cycle of the American Republic, that the most likely outlet would be some kind of FDR, New Deal type realignment. But I don't believe we are at that point. I believe we are in the final crisis of late American imperialism and capitalism. I think that I think that the two-party system is, like the political system in general, completely hollowed out and bankrupt, and has is incapable of being responsive to the crises and the demands that people think about. I mean, look, you look at any of the polls, the number one concern of Americans is lack of jobs and the economy. Yet neither party can get it together to present a real jobs plan, a plan that looks like a jobs plan to the average viewer at home. What does that tell you? I mean, they're not even able to survive. Or, you look at the last 10 years, crises like something as simple as cleaning up after a hurricane. Hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico are not unusual. They happen, there's 8 to 12 of them a year. But it caught the government by surprise. So, the Democrats and the Republicans are literally unable to even get people to be interested in voting or in supporting their candidates because they're so beholden to corporate money that they just can't do anything even to get votes.
The corporate media says that the number of people unemployed in the United States is 9.1%. That totals to be about 9 or 10 million people. The Wall Street Journal 2 days ago ran a story that said if you include the number who are severely underemployed and the people who have stopped looking for work and thus no longer counted for unemployment, the real number is 40 million people. Now, there's no jobs program the government can create that's going to put 40 million people together, and the private capitalist market is not providing those jobs. Doesn't that create a structural crisis, Kevin? And does this movement say anything about the issue of unemployment? Where do those jobs come from? How do they happen?
Oh, there's absolutely no question it creates a structural problem. If you look at if you step back from the current crisis and look a little bit bigger picture at labor, what you see is that we are now the lowest level of labor getting a share of GDP, of the total income of the country. I mean, it's just dropped at the bottom, and the people on top know that the reason why they're profiting is because labor is paid so little. So that's a long-term problem that's at a crisis point, and they've been playing with those unemployment numbers for a long time, taking out the kind of things you talk about, which is people who want jobs but have given up. Just by that alone, you double the unemployment rate. So those numbers are monkeyed with. What is really that all is structural problems, and there are solutions to those issues, but not by this government. And what's really looking on the very near horizon, the European banking crisis, the Bank of America near bankruptcy, either one of those happen, and we go into another tailspin in the financial sector, they're going to come back and ask another trillion. The Federal Reserve gave bigger than our GDP to the banks in the last bailout. They're going to come back and ask for $1 trillion or $15 trillion more. I don't think that people are going to put up with it. So that could create the political realignment. You have this incredible lack of jobs, you have another banking failure, and you have them coming back for another bailout. What are workers going to say then? So I think there are some real potential crisis points ahead for the United States, and they're in a very weak state to respond to it.
I think that, theoretically, there are ways that the existing system could address these problems.
Yes.
They could certainly create a massive public works program on the same level as happened in the 1930s. At that point, in the 1930s, 6 million Americans were put directly to work 9 million Americans were put directly to work by the federal government in programs like the WPA, allowing for population growth. That's 20 million Americans today. Yeah. That would take a huge dent out of unemployment.
And we need that.
And we do.
There's a need for that.
High-speed rail, bridges are falling apart, schools are
But the government, both parties seem to be going in the opposite direction.
Well, that's what he says. You can do it, but not in this current political system.
And then there's also another issue, which is not talked much about, but people don't really need jobs. What people need is money. And it may be that as over the course of the last 60 years, as the American worker has become increasingly efficient, now 3 times more efficient than he or she was in 1950, that we may have to accept that the average number of hours should not be 40 per worker. Maybe we need to go to a 25-hour week so that everyone can be employed.
Or guaranteed national income.
Or guaranteed national income, like in Alaska with people who get pipeline payments. We have to think outside the box, and that's exactly what's going on with the Democrats and the Republicans in power, is that they're in the box.
Yes.
And they could step out, but they're just not going to.
That's why I say if this gets co-opted by the Democratic Party, it's over, because we got to get outside that box.
Right. The box includes a number of economic realities that the current governments and all of the corporations and the banking system plays by. You mentioned Europe. If Greek sovereign debt is such that Greece defaults, which would make the Lehman Brothers default seem like a penny ante operation. How would the politicians of the Democrats, the Republicans, or the European politicians deal with that level of economic contagion? Is there any way under those circumstances, in other words, a cascading second round?
That's what I was talking about.
And that's what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Like, how do they... I mean, isn't that really sort of the recipe for the political destabilization?
And that could happen next week.
Yeah, any day.
That could happen
Okay,
any
so
day.
you're gonna be here in this park for 4 months, and it could happen anytime next week or next month. You don't have a crystal ball, but what do you envision in the next 4 months? What's going to happen? Is this going to be a magnet for the unemployed? Is this going to be a magnet for the labor movement, the people who are contending with these economic realities?
Well, the long-term unemployed. One of the groups that endorsed this was the American 99ers Union. That's 6 million long-term unemployed. These people are angry and they're ready for massive change. We have really gotten to the point where things that you couldn't have said 6 months ago now are in common political discourse. Mm-hmm. The word revolution.
Sure. Can you
revolt.
imagine 10 years ago?
Yeah, or even less.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 years ago, when Obama was just elected, revolution? Revolt? No way. And now it's being talked about. In fact, not only is it being talked about, there are hundreds of occupations all over the country.
Well, talk about that. Talk about, especially because we have a very large international audience, what's going on around the United States specifically? Where is it?
All over. I mean, if you go to occupytogether.org, you can see it for yourself and get the full list. But it's gigantic. I mean, I read about a week and a half ago, it was about 66 occupations happening or being planned. Then about a week ago, it was about 111. Then about a day before we started this one, it was over 300. And I don't know what it is now. I've heard even bigger numbers. And in like in Los Angeles, the whole city hall is surrounded by occupations on every side of it. And I saw in Portland, 6,000 people involved in occupation there. This is happening all over the country. It's an amazing new political reality. And so if you add to that happening now, and that economic poison happens from Greece or the European banks or Bank of America, that's a recipe for massive change very quickly, and it's going to be hard to predict where it goes.
You know, there's a funny comparison that I've heard, and I have to say I think it's kind of apt. These are like little Soviets before the Russian Revolution.
Yeah.
And what's happening is that because the mainstream structure of the media, and the economic planners and the political class have become essentially irrelevant to our lives. People are pushing them aside, and they're having to reinvent politics, everything from the ground up. You know, I mean, forget Robert's Rules of Order. We just have, you know, it's democracy at a very base level, and it's frustrating, it's slow, it's annoying, and it's exciting, and it's thrilling, and it's vibrant, and it's what's happening next.
Yeah, that's what's so nice about this. You know, we have behind us happening in distance an assembly. That's our little democracy. People, all part of this community, sitting together, deciding how we respond to the park police. That's a democracy developing. One of the things we want to come out of this occupation with is a commitment to building our own alternative economy that's democratized. As I said, where employees own businesses, where there are community banks, where there's community markets, and it's much more controlled. Now, the combination of these assemblies and localized, democratized economies, you're almost creating a government and economy alongside of the U.S. government.
Right.
It's right. And we're talking about now. We're talking among us. We're talking about now a national assembly, bringing these assemblies together. Everyone sends 2 delegates, and we'll have a national assembly somewhere. What is that? Is that like an alternative to Congress?
Yeah. I mean, this plaza has the Fourth Estate. It has a press tent. It has a food provider. It has a Congress.
Health.
It has healthcare. It has a legal system.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a microcosm for a new society.
You mentioned before the Russian Revolution, the Soviets, the workers' councils or peasants' councils, like the General Assembly. That was also a hallmark of the Paris Commune in 1871. In South Africa, a similar sort of thing started to take place in Soweto and the townships. In other words, a kind of dual power,
exactly.
a second point of authority,
a parallel government,
where people are starting to listen to the. So you believe this is a microcosm of a replicated historical process.
I think about the initial steps of it.
It's the initial steps.
We don't know what's going to happen next. At the very early steps, we can envision that growing into something very significant. And if there's financial crises that we've talked about that happen, that will increase the spark of that and it'll grow faster. But we see the initial stages of it here, and that's an amazing thing. You would not, 3 years ago, you couldn't imagine this happening in the United States. Now it is.
Now, Barack Obama, by the way, could put us all out of business by going on television tonight and announcing that giant public works project.
That's right.
And bringing the troops home.
An FDR program.
Right, and bringing the troops home and figuring out a way to employ those former troops here. That would be the end of us. I mean, Occupy Lansing is going to go away.
That's right.
But Barack Obama is also handicapped because the Republicans in Congress who control the House of Representatives clearly will make sure that no bill like that passes the House of Representatives. Should he be appealing directly to the people?
If Barack Obama appealed directly to the people, I think he'd have 1 million people around the Capitol demanding that the Republicans go along, and they would have to. And I would be among them.
He could totally co-opt this by doing the right thing. I don't think he can co-opt this because he's going around the country raising $1 billion. He's stuck in that old box. He's having fundraisers that cost $35,800 to get into. That's more than the individual median income of the American people. So if you earn the median individual income, you can't afford to, and put all your money of the year together, you can't go to afford one Obama fundraiser. I mean, he's so out of touch to this that I don't think he's capable of doing that.
Right.
But Ted's right. If that was what he finally did, he would have captured the revolutionary spirit that Americans are feeling.
We only have about a minute and a half left. I want to ask you very quickly, you guys had a march, the Air and Space Museum, there was protesting the drone exhibit. I know the older activists here make the connection between militarism and war and the economic situation. What's the situation with young people? Are they receptive to an anti-war, anti-militarist message? Are they new to this? Or are they just where everybody else is in terms of the politics?
My experience is that everybody gets it. I haven't seen any kind of age difference there whatsoever. I mean, it just seems so obvious to anybody who really looks at the numbers and thinks about the fact that we're sitting on top of a $14.3 trillion deficit. And when you're spending 54% of your federal tax dollar either on wars past or present, the past being 19% of that 54 is debt service on old wars. You have to ask yourself, how is it that there's no money to build a new wing to the local elementary school? Obviously, there is money. I mean, the country is no less rich than it was 10 or 20 years ago. All that's happened is that all the wealth and the power and the money has aggregated into a very few set of hands, and now, as a result, capitalism is no longer working, the money's not circulating. It's like, what's the difference between a live person and a dead person? A live person and a dead person have all the same parts. They have all the same fluids. The only difference is that the blood moves around inside a living person. Money is the blood, the lifeblood of a capitalist economy. The money has stopped moving. That's why the economy is dead.
Okay, Kevin Zeese, we have about 45 seconds, so I'm going to let you have the last word. Go ahead.
I think that people can get, when people get the information, they get it. It's quite obvious. We scheduled this on October 6th as the beginning of the 11th year of the Afghanistan war, which is also the first week of a new fiscal year where everything's in austerity except for military spending. So we want to highlight that for people to understand it more clearly, because I think when they get it strongly, and they will turn and oppose empire. Well, that's the one thing we don't get to talk about in the United States is empire. We are a massive empire, and empire economy is no longer working for the American people. Maybe it never worked, but it's not working now. It's working for the transnationals, but in the military-industrial complex, but nobody else.
Well, Kevin Zeese, one of the organizers for the October 6th Stop the Machine, Ted Rall, columnist, I want to thank you both. We're here in Freedom Plaza, a block from the White House, 13 blocks from the Capitol building, and right at the epicenter of the Stop the Machine continuing occupation, which will be here for months to come. We'll see you next time.